So good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. On behalf of our family, my grandmother, Maureen, my mom, Colleen, my stepfather, Leon, my wife, Kim, and our two children, Josh and Paige, we want to thank you for taking the time today to celebrate this incredible life of Carroll Richard Don Bosco Hann. Hemstitch. So before I begin my remarks, I just want to address my mother's profound concerns that I might use too many big words or drone on. So anyone who knows me knows that I have a tendency to do that. So Mom, even at 35 years old, your expectations are extremely important to me. So I promise to do my best to limit my vocabulary and knock this speech out of the proverbial ballpark. And we all know that I wasn't that great of a ball player. So it's befitting that today, December the 29th, is National Heroes Day. It's an honor, it's a day to honor people that we look to who inspire us to be best, to be the best person and representative of who we are. If asked to define the word hero, many of us will name the qualities that demand a person rise above. It's the qualities that drive a person to be stronger, smarter, and more than the average human being. And these are the people who give when they have nothing to give. Sometimes these are real-life heroes, and sometimes they get recognized. I'm confident in saying that Dick Hann is a hero to all of us. The late Ernest Hemingway once said that every man's life ends the same way. It's only the details of how he lived and how he died that distinguish one man from another. I cannot in one speech begin to scratch the surface of Carroll Richard Hann's magnanimous 95 years on this earth. But I'm going to do my best in this short amount of time that I have to share the kind of man that my grandfather was and how each of us can learn something from him. And this would be the point where my grandfather would say, ugh, all this for me. Just go home. I just want to watch the ball game. So I once heard it said of man that the idea is to die young as late as possible. You see, my grandfather, no, see, I'm already getting mixed up. In his 80s, a favorite pastime of Dick Hann was maintaining his reputation of planting and harvesting the best garden on Glenside. Oh, hell, it was the best garden in Washington County. And oh boy, did my grandfather deliver every year, even well into his 90s. My grandfather loved to garden. He was locally famous after all. He grew his famous 100-pound pumpkins. No Glenside hooligans were going to steal Dick Hann's 100-pound pumpkins around Halloween time. Maybe that's why he grew them, and perhaps it was Pap's Halloween insurance policy. The joke, if there ever was one, wasn't necessarily on the kids who stole the pumpkins from Glenside, from the many Glenside porches. The joke maybe was on all of us, or maybe my grandmother, Maureen, who much preferred Dick to grow those little pumpkins instead. At 88 years young, my grandfather's doctors said that he needed some routine maintenance on his heart. Of course, it wasn't a minor surgery that Pap required. No, it had a major risk. He had a double valve replacement. Knowing the complications, the always brave Dick Hann went forth, unafraid and fearless, as usual. We would expect nothing less. Incidentally, the doctors, nurses, and the care staff at Sinai Hospital in Baltimore, they grew to quickly understand that Dick Hann had a personality second to none. Our family is especially grateful to each and every one of them for prolonging his life so that we could make so many more wonderful memories with our hero. 2 months later, after surgery, sometime in the fall months, Pap was back to his normal routine. Up by 9:30 a.m., breakfast, out the door, into his backyard or his lot, and you could find him burning something, which brought him a lot of peace and solace. He was outside still well into his 90s, from sunrise until always sunset. Even into his 90s, my grandfather, a pro-amateur bowler, I think it's fair to say, did not succumb to the limitations of his age. To the chagrin of my grandmother, Dick Hann's idea of Friday night fun was hanging out at the bowling alley with the Alsatia Club or his senior league cronies and knocking down a few beers. For what it's worth, my grandfather knew how to drink a few beers, or two, or three, or, well, you get it. One other thing you should know about Dick Hann, he knew how to fight. He could really throw a punch, and he had one hell of a grip, those big hands. After all, he boxed when he was in the Army and later in Hagerstown after discharging from the service. The man was a tough guy, but you may have never even known it. But there's this one time when a guy named Tiny, I don't know, we think that's his name, kicked my grandfather's ass pretty good on a bus trip somewhere. I'm a bit hazy on the details, but for some reason I think the story goes that Pap needed bail money and a new shirt afterwards. You would think that Dick Hann might have learned his lesson after that. Not really. Many of whom who knew Dick Hann knew that the man sometimes could pick at your nerves. He could get under your skin. He was a jokester, right? My grandfather had this wonderful, wonderful sense of humor, but sometimes what Pap thought was funny and was absolutely true wasn't necessarily relayed in a way that was, I don't know how you say it, nice. Colleen, is he getting fat? Yeah, he was talking about me. Dad, my mom would say, you can't say that. Ryan is a bit sensitive about that. Well, Pap, you're lucky that COVID hit this year and none of us could go to the gym any longer. So we're going to go with that excuse. My question is, did that man ever have any body fat on him? Yeah, he looked the same for about 50 years. He reminded us often that he drank a lot of water, 8 glasses a day, and he ate breakfast, dinner, and supper, you have to call it supper, at certain times. To his very last days, my grandfather's life was instructive. As he aged, he taught all of us how to grow older with dignity, humor, and kindness. And when the good Lord finally called him home, my grandfather taught us how to meet his Maker with courage and with joy and the promise of what lies ahead. I had a running thought on the day that my grandfather passed away. One reason he knew how to die before his time is because he kind of almost did. One of my grandfather's favorite pastimes was fishing. He loved to fish, and he also loved to drink beer while fishing, but that's besides the point. So as the story goes, one day my grandfather was fishing on the Antietam Creek, or I think it was the Conicadry Creek, I'm not sure. Apparently he was fishing from a bridge, he fell asleep, he fell into the creek, and he could have drowned. But we don't know whether beer was involved. My mother doesn't seem to think so, but for the sake of this story, let's agree that maybe there was something else in his cooler that wasn't iced tea. There's another Glenside tale, the stubborn Dick Hann. On top of a roof where he wasn't supposed to be, he fell off the roof. Obviously, Pap survived, but what I don't know if he survived that day was my grandmother's wrath. God answered those prayers, and it turned out that God had other plans for C. Richard Hann. For Pap's part, I think those brushes, or perhaps those almost brushes with death, made him cherish the gift of life. And he lived every day to the fullest. If you knew my granddad, you knew that he was always busy. He was a man in constant motion, but he was never too busy to share his love of life with those around him. He taught us all to love the outdoors. He loved gardening. He loved watching and feeding the birds and squirrels. And he loved being outside with nature. Not a care in the world. He loved taking long walks, and he loved roaming about his backyard for hours on end. I often wondered what he was doing. He would take these long walks, and I often thought, well, what is he thinking about? But it just never seemed that he had a care in the world, and he was just perfectly content with life. I could only dream of living as he did. We sometimes as humans have this insatiable desire for wanting material things to fill some sort of void in our life. Not Dick Hann. Never. He didn't pay much mind to material possessions. That wasn't his thing. He was perfectly content with his surroundings. He was totally at peace with life and who he was. He was totally himself in his own skin. He lived the life that I could only dream of. God, he loved the simple things in life. And it's those things that I think I sometimes myself take for granted. He could sit down the lot all day in his chair and gaze at his garden and watch the fire burn, and we could sit together for hours. Sometimes we would talk, or sometimes we wouldn't. He liked company, and he could talk to anyone about anything. And so many people who knew Dick Hann, they had a story of their own because he touched so many lives. When my grandfather began to struggle just a bit, my parents, my mom and stepfather, both of whom my grandfather just adored, they bought him a birthday present of a lifetime. Actually, it was the ride of his lifetime, his golf cart, which was prominently blinged out with Boston Red Sox gear. He drove that golf cart all over the place. But you should know this. My grandfather was the worst ever backseat driver on record. It didn't matter which vehicle you were driving. If you took his golf cart for a ride and he was your passenger, I could promise you that you may never again choose to drive with him. It reminds me of the last car ride I ever took with my grandfather. It was this past summer on a warm Saturday evening. My wife and I suggested a car ride. By the way, Pap didn't hear too well in his later years. He sometimes mispronounced certain names, right? For example, my wife Kim, it's easy, K-I-M, sometimes she might simply be referred to as Kemp with a P. During that car ride, Pap sat up front in the passenger seat, and I drove. Meemaw and Kemp took the back seat, and I drove my grandparents to dam number 4. Now, I remember when I was a little boy, I took so many rides in Pap's 82 baby blue pickup truck to dam 4. Incidentally, Pap's baby blue pickup truck later doubled as my Domino's pizza delivery driver whip, and even into his 90s, Pap remarked that I dented his front bumper, and I promise I will get that fixed. The final car ride I remember was one of the happiest moments of my life. We just finished dinner. For Pap, dinner was his favorite Cracker Barrel dish, the catfish. You know, Pap that night was anxious to get out of the house. He was cooped up for a long time. And he made sure to tell me when I was driving over the speed limit, and he kept a watchful eye over my car maneuvering. And trust us all, if you screwed up driving, you would hear it quickly. Right, Mom? Although I think my mother didn't text and drive, unlike somebody she knows. Come to think of it, the horizons that my grandfather saw were always bright and always hopeful. He was a genuinely optimistic man. And that optimism guided all of us and made each of us believe that anything was possible. He continually broadened his horizons with daring decisions, even at a young age. My grandfather, he was a patriot. He was a countryman. He was a loyal fighter. He was an American to the core. After attending grade school at St. Mary's Catholic Church, or St. Mary's Catholic School in Hagerstown and working some, my grandfather enlisted in the United States Army at the age of 17 alongside his best good buddy, George Lushball. Pap, being colorblind, as he told us, he said that the Army, they would take anybody. I remember that song he taught us. You know how it goes, Mom and Leon. What was it? The chicken in the Army, they say it's the best. We gets the wings and assholes, and the officers get the rest. We don't want no more of that Army life. We just want to go home. You could hear Dick Hann singing that. Or, Mom, remember getting up in the morning? For me, it was Sunday mornings going to Sunday school at St. Joe's Catholic Church. What was it? I can't get him up, I can't get him up. Did anybody ever have any idea what the hell Porky out of a single B meant? He would sing this at the top of the stairs, and nobody understood it. You know, Pap taught me many songs and little one-off rhymes that he probably shouldn't have. For instance, Here I Sit Broken-Hearted. Never mind, I'll save that for later. like many in his generation, my grandfather spoke little about his military service. He was always proud to say that he joined General Patton's army. He was an engineer. He was stationed with Company E, 2nd Battalion, 338th Engineer Regiment. During the Second World War, Dick Hann, he laid railroad tracks. He was even a truck driver, and notably, he deactivated landmines, a job reserved only for the bravest and toughest of Army soldiers. One of the only memories that I have of my grandfather ever getting emotional was when he would talk about the horrific atrocities that he saw while he was overseas in Europe. This unimaginable sight and sounds of the Holocaust. He often couldn't talk about it. I remember watching Saving Private Ryan when I was a little boy, and Pap said that was pretty realistic. You know, though happier times were headed his way. When the war was over in 1945, Dick Hann soon returned to Hagerstown, where he soon began his 37-year career with the city of Hagerstown, or as Pap called it, the old light plant. The war was over, yes, and love was in the air. My grandfather, that handsome, curly-haired gentleman of the West End, he set his glimpses on the brown-eyed brunette beauty of the West End, Maureen Martin, whom he used to chase around the town in cars and even on roller skates. There's a story about my grandfather once driving in downtown Hagerstown inside of a car with some sort of makeshift dummy. I think George Lushball had something to do with that. Maureen Martin, the Methodist at the time, and Carroll Richard Don Bosco Hann, the Catholic, married on September 14th, 1951, in a small ceremony in Hagerstown, Maryland. I should say, too, parenthetically, that we Catholics have to use that Catholic confirmation name. Lona was my sponsor, and I still have no idea what it is, so you'll have to dig that up. Then the fun came of finding the perfect home. My grandparents moved into their first and only home on Glenside Avenue in 1955. Once addressed as 32 Glenside Avenue, but for some reason, I don't know, the address changed in the early 90s. I thought 32 was simpler. Then in the mid-60s, along came my mother, Colleen, my grandparents' first and only child, whom my grandparents have loved and adored beyond words. My meemaw would tease her, and she would say, "You're a daddy's girl." My mother, smiling, she would shake her head and smile, and she said, "Yeah, I guess I am." My grandfather spent his career as an engineer at the Hagerstown Municipal Light Plant. Of course, now it no longer stands, but they still have a brick from the old melt plant. Pap retired in '85, which coincidentally, his retirement coincided with the birth of his first and only grandchild. So when I came along that November, and Pap never quite admitted this, I'd like to believe that he was embarking on a much bigger responsibility, a much more important responsibility, and that was being a grandfather. Come to think of it, my youngest childhood memories I have are with him. He taught me how to play baseball, though he teased me because I wasn't very good. Matt was the ball player. I'd always strike out, as he conveniently reminded me the last night he was on this mighty earth. He'd say, "You couldn't ever pick the ball up and just hit it." I think that bothered him. He still laughed about that until his final moments. My grandfather, he taught me how to garden. He taught me how to plant a garden and pick out the best vegetables. He taught me how to ride a bicycle, taught me how to fish, taught me how to sharpen a pocket knife, taught me how to play poker. We played with pennies. He taught me how to pitch a tent, taught me how to ride a go-kart, taught me how to rake leaves, taught me how to use a push mower and how not to blow one up. Because one time I put kerosene inside of the gas tank instead of actual gasoline. He wasn't too happy about that. Occasionally, Pap would even let me ride his prized possession, which was his riding mower. But that always came with a "don't drive too fast and just cut the grass" pep talk. You know, there's so much that my grandfather taught me. He shared so much wisdom with all of us. He was a wonderful teacher, even though that wasn't really his intentions. You know, Pap was involved in so many of these local organizations, Alsatia, Elks Club, VFW. He loved his buddies from there, and he loved those little whiskey miniatures. He said they would keep him warm during the Mummers Day parade. He would walk down the middle, and he'd put up the bleachers. He had those little bottles of whiskey that he kept in his pocket in early October, November, right, Pap? At one point or another, Pap was probably a member of like every social club in Hagerstown, and everybody loved him. They knew him as Dick Hann, who could drink a beer like nobody's business, who had the best garden in town, who could crush a baseball, and whose handshake was that of a man. You see, my grandfather and I were more than just grandfather and grandson. We were pals. We hung out together. We talked about the world. We talked about what was in the news. We talked about life. We even talked about politics. For what it's worth, my grandfather was a lifelong Democrat, but he said he voted for whoever the hell he wanted to, and he would always say FDR was a Democrat and they were for the people. But in our family, we've learned lots of hard lessons this year to leave politics at the door. Right, Mom? Right, Leon? Carroll Richard Don Bosco Hann was the kindest man I had ever known. He would literally give you the shirt off his back. There wasn't a mean bone in his body. He never said a bad word about anybody unless you were Bryce Harper or Manny Machado. He did not like them. One thing you should know, and many of you already do, Pap was a lifelong Red Sox fan. He loved baseball. I kind of think he would have gone pro if he really wanted to. His favorite ball player of all time was Ted Williams, the splendid splinter. On my grandfather's 95th birthday, he threw out the first pitch at the Hagerstown Suns game. You know, he would say, "I like that Brucci." I think Brucci liked him too. In Pap's old age, he enjoyed watching countless hours of old Western reruns, the volume on high, and Pap always, for some reason, felt the need to tell us what was going to happen next. Doesn't matter what, he knew every Western, and he would tell you, walk piece by piece, this is what's going to happen. You know, I don't think that there was a Western he's never seen. You know, there's so much more that I could write and share about this wonderful man's life journey. After all, there's 95 years of material that we haven't even scratched the surface. I just want you all to know that he loved our family more than anything in this world. He has and he always will be the foundation of our family. Someone whom I look precisely to as guidance on how to be a man. My grandfather gave everything he could to his family. He was a simple and decent man who loved us. Pap passed away early on December 22nd in his living room, surrounded by his family. My mom was holding his hand. And my best friend in the whole world, Matt, he was there to provide comfort to my mom and make sure that Pap was well cared for. And we deeply appreciate that. The last night I spent with Pap, I drank a Pabst Blue Ribbon, which I think was his favorite beer. And I sat on his bedside, I was gazing at him, and I just kind of looked at him in awe. And I just looked up at him, and he looked back. And we didn't talk too much. You know, my grandfather, our friend, he's crossed over now, and I don't know whether heaven exists. You know, we Catholics we're ingrained to believe the best, but always expect the worst. I think that's what we call purgatory. If there is a heaven, Carroll Richard Don Bosco Hann has earned his right to walk in, a beer in one hand and a bowling ball in the other. If there is a heaven, I truly believe that my grandfather's there now. And I think he's chatting with Ted Williams, probably asking lots of questions and giving someone backseat driving instructions. You know, Pap could relate to all people from life. He was an empathetic man. He valued character over pedigree, and he was no cynic. He looked for the good in each person, and he usually found it. Carroll Hann knew how to be a true and loyal friend. He honored and nurtured his many friendships with his generous and giving soul. Anybody and everybody who met him will have a Dick Hann story, and always a good one. Pap had an enormous capacity to give of himself. Many a person would tell you that my grandfather became a mentor and a father figure in their own life. He listened and he consoled. He was their friend. He helped anybody without second thought. You know, finally, every day, well, at least every day, of his 69 years of marriage to my grandmother, Pap taught us all what it means to be a great husband. He married his sweetheart. He adored her. He laughed with her. Sometimes they got frustrated with one another. Just a few weeks ago, a minor squabble broke out in the middle of the living room over Pap's gratuitous use of his remote control living room chair. My grandmother looked over and she was a little pissed, and she said, "You're going to break it, Dick. Go back to sleep, Maureen." Oh, how he loved her. He was dedicated to her totally. They were just truly inseparable. You know, my grandfather, he taught me another special lesson. He showed me oftentimes how to conduct himself as a gentleman. He showed us how to be courageous. And he was a man that could express his feelings and say, "I love you." He would always say that. "I love you, Pap. I love you back." You know, my grandfather was a true gentleman. Well, Pap, we're going to remember you exactly for that and so much more. Your decency, your sincerity, your kind soul will stay with us forever. So through our tears, let us see the blessings of knowing you and loving you, a great and noble man, the best grandfather, the best father, the best husband and friend there was. He was a man of the greatest generation. And in our grief, let us smile knowing that Carroll Richard Don Bosco Hann will always be with us, wherever we go. As Pap would invariably say, when he was leaving a room or when he was heading out, "Don't take any wooden nickels." Carroll Hann taught us, the rest of us, to love, to laugh, and enjoy the simple things in life. He taught us the value of kindness, and he truly lived the golden rule. And as I said in my opening about heroes, he was a hero to all of us. My grandfather's favorite singer, Dean Martin, once said, "I want to be remembered as a damn good entertainer, nothing spectacular. A good entertainer who made people enjoy themselves and made them laugh a little. I want them to think he was a nice guy, he did pretty good, and we loved him." You are a man, Pap. You are a great big man. We love you, and we're going to miss you so much. So I thank you all for being here to celebrate this life. I'm sorry I didn't scratch the surface of it. And remember, don't take any wooden nickels. Thank you. this is. I thought you were going to shake my hand.
No.